The contract that changed everything. The Galactic Assassins Guild had existed for over 1,000 standard cycles. Its efficiency was legendary, its success rate unquestionable. Every high-value target that ever crossed the Guild's path had been eliminated, except one: the humans. It started as an anomaly. Then it became a statistical impossibility. Finally, it evolved into an existential nightmare. The Guild's leader, Supreme Coordinator Vrelka, stood before the assembled council of elite assassins. The holographic display in front of them flickered, revealing a staggering report. Human target success rate, 0%. It was a number no one in the room could comprehend. The Guild has failed. Vrelka's voice rasped through the chamber. For over 5 decades, not a single human has been successfully assassinated. The murmurs among the assassins turned into outright disbelief. For a profession where failure meant disgrace, this was beyond catastrophic. Master Assassin Karath, a towering reptilian with scars carved across his hardened scales, scoffed. "This is absurd. The Guild has taken down high-security warlords, telepathic strategists, and celestial beings with future sight. What makes these humans so?" He hesitated, looking at the report again. "Untouchable." "That," Vrelka said grimly, "is what we must determine." The council turned its attention to the case studies, and the sheer absurdity of the failures made even the most ruthless killers in the galaxy hesitate. A lone human janitor, working in a remote colony outpost, had unknowingly thwarted 3 assassination attempts, one involving a poisoned air vent, which he happened to repair with duct tape, sealing the toxin inside, another with a high-tech sniper, whose aim was thrown off when a pigeon-sized alien suddenly chose to nest inside the rifle barrel, and a third involving a direct melee attack, which ended when the assassin slipped on a mop bucket and knocked himself unconscious. A high-ranking human diplomat had been targeted during a peace summit. The operative assigned to the job infiltrated the diplomatic quarters, prepared to inject a lethal neurotoxin into the human's drink. He never got the chance. The diplomat, completely oblivious to his impending death, had tripped over his own feet, sending his drink splashing all over the assassin's hidden cloaking field, short-circuiting it and exposing him instantly. Every attempt ended the same way, not in human brilliance, but in sheer dumb luck. The universe seemed to twist probability itself in their favor. Even the Guild's most elite assassins, those who had executed hundreds of successful contracts, found themselves at the mercy of human unpredictability. Probability manipulation, Karath suggested, his scales shifting uneasily. Some kind of subconscious quantum effect. "No." Vrelka shook his head. "We've tested them. They don't control it. It just happens." Another assassin, a shadowy figure whose name was whispered in terror across 5 sectors, folded his arms. "So what do? We cannot allow the humans to undermine the Guild's reputation. If we cannot kill them, what then?" Vrelka's mandibles clicked and fought. "We send our best. No distractions, no elaborate plans. A direct confrontation." The room went silent. There was only one being in the Guild with a record of perfect success: Cirrus the Unseen. She had eliminated planetary leaders mid-sentence, erased entire royal bloodlines before breakfast, and had never, ever failed a contract. Her mandibles flexed slightly in interest. "I accept." The room exhaled as one. Finally, humanity would fall. Planet Ashwin 3, human colony. Jonathan J.T. Trent was nobody special. A mechanic, ex-military, and an expert at fixing things. If the colony's power grid went down, he patched it up. If the water filtration system was on the fritz, he rerouted it. He didn't deal with politics, war, or interstellar drama. Just machines. And yet, unknown to him, someone had placed an intergalactic contract on his head. JT sat on a crate, wiping his hands clean after a long day of work. The colony was small, only a few thousand people, and he knew just about everyone. They were just simple folk trying to survive, nothing like those high-tech city planets where people barely looked at each other. The wind was cool that evening, and the air smelled of engine grease and freshly tilled soil. He took a deep breath and leaned back. That's when he noticed the glint of something in the distance. At first, it looked like a trick of the light, but the movement was too smooth, too deliberate. His military instincts kicked in, and his fingers twitched toward the wrench lying next to him. Just as he reached for it, a small ting echoed from the crate beside him. A single knife, perfectly thrown, was buried in the metal inches from his head. His heartbeat spiked. He knew what this was. Assassin. And not just any assassin. The only reason he was still alive was because they wanted him to know. JT didn't hesitate. He ran. His boots pounded against the dusty ground as he bolted toward the nearest building. Years of military training told him to zigzag, to stay unpredictable, to make himself the worst possible target. He dove behind an old storage unit just as another knife whipped past his ear, embedding itself in the wall. Who the hell had he pissed off? JT forced himself to think fast. If this was an elite, they were already tracking his every move. He needed to change the game. A glance at the flickering power relay nearby gave him an idea. Grabbing a length of exposed wiring, he yanked it free and quickly tied one end to a loose panel on the storage unit. Then he tossed the other end onto the damp ground near a puddle of spilled coolant. A figure emerged from the shadows, sleek, predatory, and inhumanly fast. Xeris the Unseen moved with effortless precision, her multi-jointed limbs almost floating across the ground. Her eyes glowed faintly under the colony's artificial lights, her assassin's cloak barely flickering as she moved. "Human," she said in a voice like silk and steel. "Do you know who I am?" GT swallowed, keeping his hands near his rigged trap. "Nope, and I don't particularly care." Xeris tilted her head, her mandibles twitching in amusement. "A shame. You won't live long enough to learn." She lunged. JT twisted just in time. He kicked the storage unit as hard as he could, yanking the wire loose. A burst of electricity arced through the ground. Xeris' enhanced reflexes should have saved her. Should have. But at that exact moment, an old colony supply drone, on its usual maintenance route, clipped the edge of the storage unit, shifting its angle by 2 degrees. Instead of harmlessly missing her, the entire shockwave rebounded directly into her. With a yelp of surprise, Xeris convulsed midair and crashed into the supply crates behind her. JT blinked. Did she just knock herself out? Slowly, cautiously, he approached the downed assassin. She was breathing, barely conscious, but alive. The energy surge had fried her cloaking field, leaving her sprawled out in full view. "Well," GT muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's a first." Somewhere in the galaxy, the Guild's perfect record had just taken a devastating hit. And it was only the beginning. When assassins fail, chaos prevails. Xeris the Unseen had never failed. Not once. And yet, as she lay sprawled across the dusty ground of the human colony, her limbs twitching from the unexpected electric discharge, she knew that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Her enhanced vision flickered as her neural interface struggled to reboot. She forced herself upright, her body sluggish. The scent of burnt circuits filled the air, her cloaking field completely fried by the crude electrical trap. The Guild had spent decades perfecting stealth technology, and yet, she had been taken down by a human mechanic and a loose wire. Unacceptable. She lifted her head, expecting to see her target running for cover, preparing a desperate defense. Instead, she saw JT Trent standing over her, hands on his hips, shaking his head. "Yeah, see," he said, sighing. "I don't know what kind of high-tech ninja school you went to, but you should probably ask for a refund." Xeris bared her mandibles, pushing herself upright with a snarl. "You." Before she could move, a wrench flew through the air and smacked her square in the forehead. She collapsed back onto the ground. JT winced. Okay, that was not part of the plan. But, ugh, good to know that worked. His pulse was still hammering in his chest. He'd been in firefights before. He had seen aliens before. But nothing quite prepared a man for an intergalactic assassin literally appearing out of nowhere to kill him. The problem was, now that she was down, what the hell was he supposed to do with her? Meanwhile, across the galaxy, in an office that technically didn't exist, the Guild's board of directors was watching in horrified silence. A holographic projection of Cirrus, their best assassin, lay unconscious in the dirt. A human stood over her, visibly confused. The boardroom was dead quiet. Then, finally, the Supreme Coordinator Vrelka shattered the silence. "What?" he rasped, his voice an ominous hiss. "The hell just happened?" No one spoke. One of the junior operatives, a three-eyed insectoid with too many limbs and not enough sense to stay quiet, nervously checked the live data feed. Odd, it seems. He hesitated. Cirrus was incapacitated by an electrical overload. Indirectly. By accident. Vrelka's mandibles twitched. She was taken down by an accident. The junior operative nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." And the human. "Not only unharmed, sir, but he seems to be debating whether or not to tie her up." A low, horrified murmur swept through the chamber. This was not how things were supposed to go. The Guild had a reputation. A terrifying, legendary, flawless reputation. There was not a single sentient being in the known universe who did not fear the Guild's name. And yet, here was a human standing over their best assassin, looking like he was considering duct tape as a viable countermeasure. "This cannot be allowed," Vrelka said, his voice dangerously low. "If word of this reaches the wider galaxy, we will be a laughingstock." Another assassin, one with long, razor-sharp appendages and an unsettling smile, leaned forward. "We send reinforcements. A team. The human has no idea what he's dealing with." Vrelka considered it. More assassins, more firepower, more certainty. And yet, deep down, something unsettling twisted in his gut. Because he had read the reports. He had studied every failed human contract before this one. And every single time, the same pattern emerged. The more they tried, the worse it got. But what choice did they have? They were the Guild. They didn't fail. "Deploy a secondary strike team," Vrelka commanded. "This time, no mistakes. Back on Ashwin 3. JT scratched his head. What the hell do you do with an unconscious assassin? On one hand, he could turn her into the colony's security force. On the other hand, if she was the best, then she probably had backup. And if backup was coming, he needed answers. He sighed and crouched down next to the still-twitching alien, tapping her forehead lightly with his knuckle. Hey, scary space lady. Wake up." Zira's compound eyes snapped open. Her first instinct was to kill, but her muscles were still recovering from the shock. Before she could lash out, JT held up a very large wrench, tilting his head. "I'm not looking to brain anyone else tonight," he warned. "But I need to know why in the name of all things greasy and mechanical someone sent a space ninja after me." Zira glared. "I will tell you nothing." JT nodded. "That's fair." Then he picked up a rusty canister labeled highly volatile coolant and casually shook it. Zira's pupils shrunk. "You wouldn't." JT grinned. "I have absolutely no idea how this stuff works, which makes me exactly the kind of idiot who might accidentally shake it the wrong way." Boom. No more assassin. Zira clenched her jaw. This human, this mechanic, was completely unpredictable. That made him dangerous. "You are marked," she finally admitted. "Someone paid an enormous sum to see you dead." JT frowned. "But why?" "That, I do not know." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Great. So not only does someone want me dead, but even the person trying to kill me doesn't know why." A soft beeping sound suddenly emanated from Zira's wrist. Her backup was coming. Zira's eyes flicked toward the sky. The stars above the colony twinkled softly, but JT noticed the faintest shimmer in the darkness. "More of you, huh?" JT muttered, following her gaze. She smirked. "They won't fail." JT didn't smirk back. Instead, he sighed deeply, reached into his tool belt, and pulled out a small, grease-stained notebook labeled JT's Troubleshooting Guide. He flipped through the pages quickly. "Let's see," he murmured. "Protocol for fixing power surges, rust damage, planetary assassins." Ah! He stopped on a page, nodding. Xeris, watching him, narrowed her eyes. Wait, you have a written plan for this." JT tapped the notebook. "Not exactly. But I do have a general rule for when things go really, really wrong." He snapped the book shut and looked up at the approaching assassins, who were descending toward the colony like silent, deadly phantoms. Xeris smirked. "Surrender." JT grinned back. "Nope. Cause a bigger problem." And with that, he grabbed the volatile coolant, yanked a very important-looking valve, and hurled it straight toward the colony's main power grid. Xeris had exactly 1 second to realize what he had just done before. The entire colony plunged into darkness as a massive electrical explosion lit up the night sky. Somewhere above, the incoming assassins' targeting systems short-circuited instantly. Xeris stared at the destruction. JT grinned and tossed his wrench over his shoulder. "Congratulations," he said. "Your backup just lost their cloaking field." And sure enough, dozens of shadowy figures were suddenly, very visibly, falling from the sky. Xeris blinked. For the first time in her career, she realized something horrifying. The humans weren't lucky. They were just insane. And worst of all, it was working. The worst possible target. Xeris, the unseen, had been trained to expect the unexpected. She had fought in wars, infiltrated royal chambers, and assassinated targets under impossible conditions. But nothing could have prepared her for this. She watched, utterly stunned, as dozens of elite assassins, the deadliest killers in the galaxy, fell from the sky like stunned pigeons after the humans' crude sabotage knocked out the power grid. "Tell me that was an accident," she muttered, still trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of what she had just witnessed. JT Trent, the human who was supposed to be her helpless target, grinned and dusted his hands off. "You kidding? I just turned the entire colony into a blackout zone. Now they can't see me, but I can see them." Xeris stared at him. She had been trained in strategic warfare since childhood. She had memorized every assassination technique known to the Guild. And yet, the human mechanic had just accomplished something she had never even considered. He had weaponized complete stupidity. "This isn't how things are supposed to go," she hissed under her breath. JT smirked. "Yeah, welcome to dealing with humans." Before she could react, he grabbed her arm and yanked her behind a storage unit. Xeris instinctively reached for a concealed blade, but stopped when she realized. He wasn't taking her hostage. He was taking cover with her. She blinked. "Are you Shay?" JT held up a hand, listening. Above them, the assassins scrambled to regain control. Their cloaking fields flickered, some of them landing hard, others trying to adjust to the unexpected situation. JT nodded to himself. "All right, let's see what we're dealing with." He peeked out from behind the crates, then pulled back immediately. Xeris sighed, rubbing her temple. "How many?" "About 15. All armed, all pissed." Xeris scowled. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Guild never needed a second attempt. The fact that they had even deployed backup meant they were already in damage control mode. And that meant, "Vrelka is watching," she muttered. JT raised an eyebrow. "Vrelka?" Xeris exhaled slowly, the head of the Assassin's Guild. JT let out a low whistle. "So what you're saying is, I should be honored." Xeris shot him a glare. "What I'm saying is, you have about 15 minutes before they stop underestimating you and bring in the real killers." GT nodded thoughtfully. Then he turned to her with a grin. Great, you're gonna help me stop him. Xeris' mandibles clicked in confusion. What? GT gestured at the battlefield. Look, if they kill me, they'll kill you next for failing. And even if you somehow get out of this alive, the guild's not gonna let you live down screwing up the easiest contract in history. Xeris bristled. I do not screw up. JT pointed at her fried cloaking device, the scorch marks on her armor, and the fact that she was currently hiding behind cover with her own target. Yeah, he smirked. Could have fooled me. She hated that he was right. Xeris considered her options. She could try to fight her way out. But the guild didn't tolerate failures. If she returned empty-handed, they would never let her live it down. And worse, if the assassins failed again, the guild would just keep sending more, until the entire colony was reduced to rubble. That wasn't strategy. That was desperation. And the guild was never desperate. She exhaled slowly. Fine. We make it out of this alive. I'm going to need answers. JT grinned. Deal. But first, he reached into his tool belt and pulled out a screwdriver. Xeris frowned. What are you going to do with that? JT twisted a rusty old valve next to them. A second later, a thick cloud of coolant mist erupted from a nearby pipe, blanketing the battlefield in freezing fog. Xeris blinked. This human had just turned a broken pipe into a smoke screen. JT grinned. Now they can't see us either. Xeris closed her eyes briefly. I hate you. Above the colony, guild command ship. Vrilka watched the battle unfold in absolute horror. The elite assassins were scrambling. Their targeting systems were failing. Their cloaking fields were shorting out. And worst of all, Xeris was fighting alongside the human. Vrilka's mandibles twitched violently. This, he whispered, horrified, is an absolute disaster. The junior operative, who had been monitoring the situation, hesitated. Sir. Vrilka exhaled slowly, his exoskeleton shifting colors in frustration. This was supposed to be the easiest contract in the history of the guild. The junior operative coughed awkwardly. With respect, sir, that was the assumption. Vrilka's eyes narrowed. Then explain to me why our top assassins are currently losing a fight to a colony mechanic with a toolbox. The operative had no response. Vrilka exhaled again, turning away. We have only one option left. The operative stiffened. Sir, you don't mean. Yes, Vrilka said grimly. Activate Project Blackout. A tense silence fell over the bridge. The operative swallowed. Sir, with all due respect, Project Blackout has never been tested on humans. Vrilka's eyes gleamed. Exactly. Back on Ashwin 3, JT and Xeris ducked behind another supply crate, listening to the confused shouts of the assassins blindly searching through the fog. JT tapped Xeris on the shoulder. Hey, quick question. She sighed. What now? How do assassins call for backup? Xeris frowned. Why? JT pointed behind them. A second wave of ships had just entered the atmosphere. Xeris' blood ran cold. You have got to be kidding me. JT exhaled and pulled out his notebook. All right, he muttered, flipping through pages. Time for Plan C. Xeris narrowed her eyes. What's Plan C? JT pulled out a blowtorch and grinned. Make things worse. And with that, he ignited the colony's entire fuel reserve. The night sky erupted in a firestorm. Somewhere, in the deepest corners of the galaxy, the universe let out an exhausted sigh. Because once again, the guild had made a terrible mistake. They had picked the worst possible target, a human. And now it was his turn. When the guild declares war on probability, the sky was burning. JT Trent had always been a man of simple solutions. If something was broken, you fixed it. If something was in your way, you moved it. And if an entire guild of elite assassins was trying to kill you, You made yourself the worst possible target. The colony's fuel reserve had just exploded, lighting up the night in a brilliant inferno. The assassins, still recovering from the power grid blackout and the coolant fog, were now caught in absolute chaos. Xeris the Unseen, one of the guild's best, watched in disbelief. "Did you just?" She struggled to form words as the sky reflected a firestorm in her compound eyes. "Yup," JT smirked, tucking his blowtorch back into his tool belt. "Welcome to improvised problem-solving." Xeris inhaled sharply. This was madness. The human had single-handedly turned a perfect assassination into an utter disaster. And worst of all, it was working. The assassins, highly trained, deadly killers, were now scattering as the roaring flames triggered a chain reaction across the colony's industrial sector. Metal structures groaned, support beams collapsed, and storage units detonated one after another, sending debris raining across the battlefield. Their precisely calibrated attack strategy was crumbling under random, uncontrollable destruction, and humans thrived in chaos. "All right," JT cracked his knuckles, scanning the battlefield. "They're disoriented. We got about 5 minutes before they regroup." Xeris turned to him with an expression she had never worn before. Pure, undiluted fear. "You," she exhaled, her mandibles twitching. "You're not normal." JT grinned. "Nope." Above the colony, Guild command ship. Supreme Coordinator Vrilka was losing his mind. "This is impossible," he whispered, watching the destruction unfold on the holographic display. The entire assassination squad, the best of the Guild's operatives, was in full retreat. From a single human, the junior operative, clearly fearing for his life, swallowed hard. "Sir, should we?" "No," Vrilka's voice was cold. "We are beyond containment. Deploy the shock troopers." The operative froze. "Shock troopers? Sir, they're meant for planetary suppression, not assassinations." Vrilka's clawed fist slammed into the console. "We're past assassination." His eyes burned with fury. "We're at war." The operative hesitated before tapping the command console. Across the ship, red lights flared to life. A deep, synthetic voice echoed over the intercom. "Shock Trooper Unite. Deploying." And below, in the burning colony, the sky split open. Back on Ashwin 3, JT and Xeris ducked behind a wrecked supply crate as something massive entered the atmosphere. At first, it looked like a falling star. But as it got closer, JT saw it wasn't falling. It was descending. JT muttered, shielding his eyes. "That's new." Xeris' mandibles clicked violently. No. They wouldn't. And then she saw the insignia. Her blood ran cold. JT frowned. "All right, Space Lady, you want to explain what that is?" Xeris exhaled, staring at the descending behemoth with absolute dread. "Shock troopers." JT blinked. "That's a badass name." "No," Xeris snapped, gripping his arm with sudden urgency. "You don't understand. They're not assassins. They're—" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Planetary enforcers." JT didn't like how that sounded. "Great. So, what's their specialty?" Xeris turned to him slowly, wiping out entire civilizations. JT stared at her. Then he glanced at the enormous armored war machine slamming into the ground like a meteor. "Right," he muttered. "So, Plan D." Xeris closed her eyes. "I don't even want to know what Plan D is." JT exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Don't worry," he grinned. "Neither do I." The first mistake of the shock troopers. The war machine's landing shook the entire colony. The ground trembled as the massive armored unit rose from the crater. JT had expected a heavily armed soldier. What he wasn't expecting was a 10-foot-tall mechanized exosuit, armed with plasma cannons, grav hammers, and energy shields that looked like they could flatten an entire city block. The massive black armored trooper scanned the battlefield with glowing crimson optics, its voice booming through a built-in speaker. Hostile presence DGCTD. Initiating planetary subjugation protocol. JT turned to Cyrus. Yeah, okay, now I get why you were worried. Cyrus didn't respond. She was already running. JT followed, diving into a wrecked storage facility as the first plasma cannon fired. The impact obliterated a row of colony buildings, sending molten debris raining across the outpost. JT grimaced. Okay, that's a problem. Cyrus grabbed him by the collar. You think? JT peeked out of the wreckage. The shock trooper moved with brutal efficiency, scanning the area for survivors. And then, it spoke again. Human TRGT, identified. GT's breath caught. It knew exactly who he was, and it was here specifically for him. Oh, come on, JT groaned. Cyrus' expression was grim. I told you. The guild doesn't accept failure. JT exhaled slowly. Well then, he stretched his arms. Guess I better introduce myself. Cyrus blinked. I'm sorry. What? But JT was already moving. The shock trooper's scanners locked onto him, its arm-mounted plasma cannon spinning to charge. Cyrus had exactly 1 second to process what was happening before. Boom. JT grabbed a metal pipe, shoved it into a nearby power transformer, and rerouted the entire facility's energy grid straight into the shock trooper's targeting system. The plasma cannon, mid-charge, overloaded instantly. The resulting explosion knocked the behemoth off balance, sending it crashing through 3 colony structures. JT cracked his knuckles. First lesson about dealing with humans, he smirked. The shock trooper roared, its armor sparking. JT grinned wider. We don't fight fair. Somewhere, in a darkened guild command center, Vrelka screamed into his hands. This was not how this was supposed to go. And yet, once again, the humans were winning.